Sometimes the things nobody else wants are the ones that need us most. In a dusty trading post at the edge of Wyoming, a dying German shepherd sat alone in a wire cage while people walked past without a second glance. They said he was cursed. They said he'd attacked someone. Nobody bid on him. Nobody wanted him. Then Karrin Hoyle walked in. She was 59, widowed, and carrying 20 years of guilt she couldn't shake. She looked at that dog and saw something familiar. She pulled out a $1 bill and bought him. What happened next in her remote mountain cabin wasn't just about saving a dog's life. It was about facing the past she'd been running from and the son she'd lost along the way. Could a dying animal help a broken woman find her way back? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat at the end of a road that most maps had forgotten, 12 miles past Ridgeline, Wyoming, where the pavement turned to gravel and the gravel turned to dirt, and the dirt finally surrendered to 2 tire tracks through lodgepole pine. Karrin Hoyle had lived there for 8 years, ever since the morning she'd buried her husband and decided the world had gotten too loud, too complicated, too full of people who asked questions she didn't want to answer. The structure was simple. One large room with a wood stove, a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder she climbed with less ease each year, and a small addition she'd built herself that served as storage and, when winter came hard, a place to keep supplies from freezing. The walls were chinked logs, sealed tight against wind that could cut through anything less substantial. 2 windows faced east to catch the morning light. One faced west, so she could watch storms roll in across the valley. She'd learned to read weather in those clouds, learned when to secure the shutters, and when to simply sit and watch nature remind her how small she was. Her morning routine had the precision of ritual. Up before dawn, regardless of season. The stove needed feeding. First she'd banked it the night before, but coals needed coaxing back to flame. Coffee next, the old percolator that had been her mother's, the sound of it a comfort in the pre-dawn silence. While it brewed, she'd step onto the porch and listen. The forest spoke in languages most people had forgotten. The crack of a branch under elk hooves, the warning cry of a jay spotting a predator, the different quality of silence that meant snow was coming versus the silence that meant the day would be clear. She was 59 years old and looked every day of it. Her face was weathered from decades outdoors, lines carved deep around her eyes and mouth. Her hands were calloused, scarred from 1,000 small injuries, the price of working with wood and wire and tools that didn't forgive carelessness. Her hair, once dark brown, had gone mostly grey. She kept it short now, practical, something she could wash in cold water and let air dry without fuss. Her body was lean, stripped of anything unnecessary by the physical demands of mountain living. Strong, but beginning to feel the weight of years in her joints, in the way her back complained after a day of splitting wood. She'd been beautiful once. Her husband used to tell her that back when they were young and working fire lines together, back when she believed compliments and thought the future stretched out endlessly ahead. But beauty seemed like something from another woman's life now, someone she'd been and wasn't anymore. The cabin held few luxuries. A battery-powered radio for emergency weather reports, a propane refrigerator that she kept stocked minimally. Mostly she relied on the root cellar, and, in winter, the natural freezer of her porch. Books lined one wall, mostly field guides and survival manuals, though a few novels remained from earlier years when she'd had the patience for stories. A single photograph hung above her bed, her wedding day, 32 years ago. She and Thomas standing in front of the ranger station where they'd both worked, both in uniform, both young enough to think they were invincible. Thomas had died doing what he loved. Logging accident on private land, a widowmaker branch that fell without warning. The funeral had been large, he'd been well-liked, respected. Karrin had stood beside his casket, accepting condolences from people whose faces blurred together, whose words meant nothing. When it was over, She'd driven to this cabin, a place they'd bought years before, as a someday retirement dream, and she'd simply stayed. That had been 8 years ago. In that time, she'd spoken to perhaps a dozen people total, brief exchanges in town during supply runs, nods to hikers who occasionally wandered too far off trail. Once, a lost hunter who she'd directed back toward the main road. She discovered that she didn't miss conversation, didn't miss explaining herself or defending her choices or pretending to care about weather, small talk, and gossip about people she'd never meet. But if she was honest, and in the silence of the mountains, lying was pointless, she knew the isolation wasn't really about Thomas. His death had given her an excuse, a socially acceptable reason to disappear. But she'd been disappearing long before that. She'd been pulling away from the world since the summer of 2005, since the Blackridge fire, since the day everything she'd built her identity around had crumbled to ash. The forest warden badge sat in a drawer beside her bed. She hadn't looked at it in years, but she knew exactly where it was. Tarnished now, probably. The metal would have oxidized in the mountain air. She'd been proud of that badge once, had worn it with the understanding that it meant something. Authority, yes, but more than that, responsibility. Stewardship. The Forest Service had trained her well, taught her to read topography and fuel loads, to predict fire behavior and coordinate evacuations. She'd been good at her job. Better than good. People had relied on her judgment, trusted her decisions. Until the day her judgment had failed, she pushed the thought away, the way she'd been pushing it away for 20 years. The technique was well practiced. Redirect attention to immediate tasks. The woodpile needed replenishing before the next snow. The traps along the creek needed checking. The chimney had been drawing poorly yesterday, probably needed cleaning. Physical work, concrete problems with concrete solutions, that was how you survived up here. You focused on what needed doing, and you did it. Her monthly trip to Ridgeline was a necessity she couldn't avoid. Supplies she couldn't produce herself: salt, flour, coffee, ammunition, propane canisters. She made a list, kept it short, tried to time the trips for midweek, when the trading post would be quietest. Vernon kept the place, had for as long as Karrin had been coming. He understood her need for minimal interaction, would simply nod when she entered, accept her money, help load her truck without attempting conversation beyond what was necessary. The town itself was dying slowly. Population maybe 300, most of them older folks who'd been there their whole lives, or younger families who couldn't afford to leave. The trading post served as general store, post office, and social hub. Hunters and fishermen stopped in during season. Tourists occasionally wandered through in summer, looking for authentic Western experience and finding only a run-down main street with more closed businesses than open ones. Karrin had no friends there. Acquaintances, maybe. People who recognized her truck, knew her face. But she'd made it clear from the start that she wasn't interested in community events, church suppers, holiday gatherings. The locals had taken the hint. Now, they simply left her alone, which was exactly what she wanted. Or what she'd convinced herself she wanted. October had arrived cold that year, with early snow dusting the peaks and morning ice on the water bucket. Karrin had made her list, checked her supplies, and decided she couldn't put off the trip any longer. She'd need more than usual. Winter was coming early. She could feel it in the way the animals were behaving, the thickness of fur on the deer she'd seen, the desperation with which the squirrels were gathering stores. The drive to Ridgeline took 40 minutes in good weather, longer if the roads were wet. Her truck was a 20-year-old Ford, battered but reliable, with 4-wheel drive and enough ground clearance to handle the rough track to her cabin. She'd learned to do basic repairs herself, couldn't afford to be stranded, couldn't afford to rely on anyone else. The morning she decided to go was clear, the kind of crystalline autumn day that made the mountains look like they'd been cut from blue glass and gold paper. She dressed in layers: thermal underwear, flannel shirt, canvas work jacket, boots that had molded to her feet over years of wear, a knit cap against the wind. She'd been to the trading post 100 times. It would be the same as always. Get what she needed, load the truck, drive home. Simple, routine. She had no way of knowing that this trip would be different, that in a wire cage in the corner of Vernon's dusty shop, something was waiting for her. Something nobody else wanted. Something that would crack open the careful isolation she'd built and force her to face everything she'd been running from. The truck started on the second try, engine rough until it warmed. Karrin let it idle while she went back inside for her list and wallet. The cabin would be here when she returned. It always was, solid, silent, asking nothing of her. She climbed into the truck and began the long drive down the mountain, unaware that she was driving toward the moment that would change everything. The trading post appeared around a bend in the road, exactly where it had always been. A false front building from the 1952, weathered wood, and a hand-painted sign that had faded to near illegibility. A few vehicles in the lot: Vernon's ancient Bronco, a newer pickup with Montana plates, a sedan that looked out of place among the mud and utility vehicles. Karrin parked at the far end, away from the entrance. She sat for a moment, gathering herself for the interaction ahead. Not that Vernon would demand much, he never did, but still, being around people required energy she had to consciously summon. She stepped out into air that smelled of pine and distant snow. The trading post door had a bell that rang when you opened it, a sound that had been irritating her for years. Inside was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. Vernon stood behind the counter, helping a customer. Two other people browsed the aisles. And in the corner, almost hidden in shadow, was a wire cage she'd never noticed before. Karrin gathered her supplies methodically, working from her list. But her eyes kept returning to that corner, to the cage, to what she could now make out inside it. A dog. Large, dark fur, not moving. She told herself it wasn't her concern. She had enough supplies in her cart. She should check out and leave. But her feet carried her toward the corner anyway. And when she got close enough to really see, close enough to meet the eyes that lifted slowly to meet hers, something shifted inside her chest. The dog was dying. Anyone could see that. Skeletal, matted fur, ribs visible even in the dim light. But his eyes were intelligent, aware, and filled with something Karrin recognized immediately because she saw it every morning in her own mirror: defeat, the kind that came from being given up on. She knelt slowly, ignoring the protest in her knees. The dog watched her but didn't move, didn't react. A worn tag hung from the cage. Make offer. Needs to go today. That dog's trouble. Karrin looked up. An older man stood a few feet away, local rancher named Hal something. She'd seen him around. Came from a rescue operation up north, he continued. Attacked a trainer. They were supposed to put him down, but somehow he ended up here. Been here 2 weeks. Vernon's been trying to get rid of him, but nobody's stupid enough to take on a dangerous animal. Karrin looked back at the dog. Dangerous. She'd heard that word applied to her too, after the fire. Not directly, but in the careful way people had avoided her, the whispers that followed her through the station. Dangerous judgment. Dangerous priorities. What's his name? She asked. Don't think he's got one. Or if he did, nobody's using it. The dog's eyes hadn't left hers. In them, she saw something beyond defeat. She saw waiting. Patient. Endless waiting for something that would never come. She stood and walked to the counter. Vernon had finished with his customer. That dog, she said. The one in the cage. Vernon's weathered face creased with concern. Now, Karrin, I wouldn't recommend. How much? He hesitated. Look, I've known you a long time. That animal's got problems. Last thing you need up there alone is, how much, Vernon? He studied her face, seemed to see something that made him sigh. Hell, just take him. I'm supposed to call animal control tomorrow if he's still here. They'll put him down. At least with you he'd have a chance, however slim. Karrin reached into her hip pocket, pulled out her worn wallet. Inside was a crumpled dollar bill, probably the last cash she had until her next pension check. She smoothed it on the counter and slid it toward Vernon. $1 then, she said. So we're clear it's a purchase, not charity. Vernon looked at the dollar, then at her, then nodded slowly. Your funeral. Need help loading him? No. She walked back to the cage, aware of eyes watching her from around the store. Let them watch. Let them think she was crazy. They already thought that anyway. The cage had a simple latch. She opened it, expecting what? For the dog to lunge? To cower? He did neither. Just watched her with those ancient, knowing eyes. Come on then, she said softly. We're leaving. The dog stood slowly, shakily. She could see now how weak he was, how close to the edge. But he stepped out of the cage and stood beside her, waiting. Karrin picked up the cage, might as well bring it. She could use it for storage later, and walked toward the door. The dog followed, his gait stiff and unsteady. At the counter, Vernon caught her arm gently. Karrin, good luck. She nodded and kept walking. Outside, the sunlight seemed too bright, too alive for what she was carrying. She opened the truck's passenger door. The dog looked at the height of the seat, and she could see him calculating whether he had the strength. Let me help, she said, and carefully lifted him. He was heavier than she expected, despite the visible bones, dense muscle under the neglect. She settled him on the seat, and he immediately lay down, his breathing labored. The drive back to the cabin was quiet. Karrin kept one hand on the wheel and let the other rest near the dog. Not touching, just present. He didn't move, didn't look at her, just breathed, each breath seeming to take effort. What had she done? She'd come for supplies and was returning with a dying animal. No plan, no clear reasoning, just an impulse she couldn't explain and didn't try to. The cabin appeared around its final bend, and she felt the familiar sense of returning home. But it was different this time. This time, she wasn't alone. She parked and came around to the passenger side. The dog's eyes were open, watching her. Can you walk? She asked. Slowly, he pulled himself upright, then half jumped, half fell from the seat. His legs buckled when he hit the ground, but he caught himself, stood swaying. All right, Karrin said. Let's get inside. They made it up the 3 porch steps together, a slow procession. Inside, the cabin was exactly as she'd left it, but it felt different now. Smaller, maybe. Or just less empty. The dog stood just inside the door, waiting for direction. Karrin pulled a blanket from her bed and spread it near the stove. She pointed. There, you can rest there. He walked over carefully and lay down. His eyes closed, and within seconds his breathing deepened into something that might have been sleep or might have been unconsciousness. Karrin stood watching him, her supplies still in the truck, forgotten. She'd paid $1 for a dying dog, had brought him home to a cabin 12 miles from the nearest help, had no idea if he'd make it through the night. But as she looked at him lying there, something in her chest, something that had been clenched tight for 20 years, loosened, just slightly. All right, she said to the silent room, to the sleeping dog, to herself. Let's see if we can figure this out. Outside, the afternoon sun was already beginning its slide toward evening. Winter was coming. And for the first time in 8 years, Karrin Hoyle wasn't facing it alone. The dog didn't move for 3 hours. Karrin unloaded her supplies, put them away with the careful attention that mountain living demanded. Flour in the sealed metal container that kept mice out. Coffee in the glass jar that preserved freshness. Ammunition in the dry box. Each item in its place, the ritual of it usually soothing. But today her eyes kept returning to the motionless form by the stove. She'd made a mistake. That became more obvious with each passing minute. The dog needed a veterinarian, medical care she couldn't provide, expertise she didn't have. She'd acted on impulse, something she prided herself on never doing, and now she was responsible for a creature she had no business trying to save. But the nearest vet was in Billings, nearly 3 hours away. And even if she could get the dog there, what then? She had maybe $200 in her bank account until the pension check came next week. Emergency veterinary care would cost far more than that. She'd committed herself to watching something die. Again. As the afternoon light deepened toward evening, Karrin pulled a chair close to where the dog lay and simply sat. She studied him more carefully now. German Shepherd, probably. The build was right under the neglect. His coat, where it wasn't matted or missing in patches, showed the classic black and tan coloring. His ears were large, expressive, though right now they lay flat against his skull. His paws were massive, built for covering rough ground. A working dog, bred for intelligence and loyalty, for tasks that required both physical capability and mental acuity. Whatever had happened to reduce him to this state had been catastrophic. She thought about what Hal had said at the trading post, a rescue operation, an attack. But looking at the dog now, Karrin couldn't imagine him attacking anyone. There was no aggression in him, no tension, just exhaustion so complete it had erased everything else. She'd seen that kind of exhaustion before, had felt it herself. When full dark came, she lit the oil lamps. She had electricity from a small solar setup, but she preferred lamplight in the evening, found it gentler. The dog's breathing had changed slightly, become more regular. That seemed like a good sign, though she wasn't sure. She heated water and soaked some jerky until it was soft, then placed it on a tin plate near his nose. He didn't respond. She tried water in a bowl, positioned it where he could reach without lifting his head. Still nothing. "You need to drink," she said quietly. "At least that." His eyes opened at her voice, and for a moment they regarded each other. Then, slowly, his eyes closed again. Karrin sat back. Stubborn then, or maybe just too far gone to care. She thought about forcing water, tipping his head back, making him swallow. She'd done it before with injured animals, a deer hit by a car that she'd nursed for 3 days before it could stand. But something stopped her. Some understanding that forcing this dog to do anything would be wrong, would violate something in him that was already badly damaged. So she waited. And in the waiting, in the quiet of the cabin with only the crackle of the stove and the dog's shallow breathing, memories came that she'd spent 8 years trying to avoid. Matthias. Her son. He'd be what? 37 now. A full-grown man she wouldn't recognize if she passed him on the street. The last time she'd seen him, he'd been 17, tall and gangly, all righteous anger and hurt pride. The argument played in her head with the clarity of recent events, though it had been 20 years. She could still see his face, flushed with emotion, still hear his voice cracking between boy and man as he shouted at her. "You don't trust me. You've never trusted me." "It's not about trust, Matthias. It's about you not being ready." "Not ready? I'm 17. Uncle Paul was fighting fires at 16. And look what happened to him." The silence that followed, the look on his face. She'd gone too far, used his dead uncle as ammunition, and they both knew it. "You're just scared," he'd said finally, voice low now, cold. "You're scared of everything. Scared of me getting hurt, scared of me leaving, scared of me living my own life." "Well, guess what, Mom? I'm done living in your fear." He'd left that night, packed a bag and walked out. She'd stood in the doorway of their small house in town, watching him go, telling herself he'd be back. Boys got angry, said things they didn't mean. He'd cool off and return and they'd work it out. But he hadn't come back. Not that night. Not the next week. Not ever. She'd let her pride keep her from going after him. Had convinced herself that if he wanted to leave, she wouldn't stop him. That maybe he was right. Maybe she was too controlling, too fearful. Better to let him go, let him figure life out on his own. 3 weeks after he left, the Blackridge fire started. And by the time she discovered Matthias had joined a volunteer crew against her explicit prohibition, using a different last name so she wouldn't find out it was too late to do anything, but watch the valley burn and pray he'd survive. The dog made a sound, pulling her from the memory, a soft whine, barely audible. She leaned forward and saw his eyes were open again, watching her. "Bad dreams?" she asked. "Me too." She reached out slowly and placed her hand on his side, just behind his shoulder. His muscles tensed, but he didn't pull away. Under her palm she could feel his heart, beating too fast, irregular. His body was burning energy it didn't have, fighting battles it couldn't win. "I don't know what happened to you," she said quietly. "Don't know what you did or what was done to you. But I know what it's like to be given up on. To have everyone decide you're too damaged to bother with." The dog's eyes remained fixed on hers. In the lamplight they looked almost amber, intelligent and searching. "I'm going to call you Scout," she continued. "My father had a dog with eyes like yours. Best tracking dog in Montana, he used to say. Always knew where to go, even when the trail went cold." She wasn't sure why she was talking. She'd gone months without speaking more than necessary, had gotten used to silence. But something about the dog's attention, the way he seemed to actually listen, made words come easier. "I bought you for $1, she said. "That's what they thought you were worth. $1. But I think they were wrong. I think maybe you're worth saving. Question is whether you think so." The dog's breathing had slowed slightly as she spoke, his body relaxing fractionally under her hand. "I can't force you," she admitted. "Can't make you eat or drink or fight to stay alive. That's your choice. But if you decide you want to try, I'll help you. Fair enough?" For a long moment, nothing changed. Then, slowly, the dog lifted his head. The movement clearly cost him, took effort that left him shaking. But he turned toward the water bowl and, after a pause, lapped at it. 3 times, 4, 5. Then his head lowered back to the blanket and his eyes closed. Karrin felt something unexpected. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, probably foolish, but there nonetheless. She stayed beside him through the night, dozing in the chair, waking periodically to check his breathing. Twice more he drank water. Once, near dawn, he ate a small piece of the softened jerky. As the first light touched the windows, Karrin stood and stretched, her back complaining about the night in the chair. Scout's eyes opened and tracked her movement. "All right," she said. "We've got work to do. You need medicine, food that's easier to digest, probably antibiotics. And I need to figure out how to pay for all that." She looked at the dog, at the impossible task she'd taken on, at the dollar purchase that was already costing her more than she could afford. "What was I thinking?" she asked. But she already knew the answer. She'd been thinking about wire cages and things nobody wanted, about second chances and whether redemption was possible for creatures who'd been written off. She'd been thinking about herself. And now, whether she was ready or not, whether it made sense or not, she was committed. She'd made a choice in that trading post, and there was no undoing it. Scout was hers now. And somehow, in a way she didn't fully understand yet, she was his. The morning light grew stronger, filling the cabin with the promise of a new day. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Karrin felt something stirring in her chest that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't quite despair either. It was the feeling of having something to care about, something beyond her own survival. It terrified her. The second day brought rain, cold, steady, the kind that settled in for the duration and turned dirt roads to mud. Karrin stood at the window watching it, calculating. She needed to get to town, needed supplies for Scout that she hadn't thought to buy yesterday. But the road would be treacherous, and leaving him alone felt wrong, though she couldn't explain why. Scout had moved during the night, not far, just from the blanket by the stove to a spot near her bed where he could see both the door and where she slept. The relocation spoke of instinct kicking back in, survival awareness returning. Good signs, she told herself. She pulled her medical kit from under the sink, the same battered metal box she'd carried during her warden years. Inside was a collection that spoke to decades of backcountry work, bandages and antibacterial, ointment, pain relievers, sutures, a basic veterinary manual she'd used for treating pack animals. She'd added to it over the years, trading with other wardens, learning what worked and what didn't when you were 2 hours from professional help. Kneeling beside Scout, she opened the kit. He watched her approach but didn't move, didn't resist. She took that as permission and began a careful examination. His left foreleg showed signs of old injury, poorly healed. She could feel where the bone had broken and mended crooked. That explained his awkward gait. His right ear had a tear that had scabbed over, probably infected at some point. Under the matted fur, she found more evidence of neglect sores from lying in his own waste, muscle wasting from malnutrition, the dull coat that came from vitamin deficiency. But she found no evidence of aggression, no scarring around the mouth that would suggest muzzling, no broken teeth from cage biting. Whatever had happened to make people call him dangerous, it hadn't left the physical marks she'd expect. She worked methodically, cleaning the worst of the sores with antiseptic, applying ointment, speaking softly as she went. Scout remained still, enduring her ministrations with patience that broke her heart a little. "You're a good boy," she murmured, working carefully around a particularly bad wound on his haunch. "Someone trained you well. Someone cared, once." The thought led her to wonder about his history. Rescue dogs were expensive to train, took months of specialized work. Someone had invested time and money in Scout, had shaped him into whatever he'd been meant to be, search and rescue, probably, given the breed and build. And then something had gone wrong. An attack, they'd said. But attacks didn't happen in a vacuum. There was always context, always a reason. She thought about Matthias again, couldn't seem to stop herself from thinking about him. Scout's situation kept triggering memories, drawing parallels she didn't want to acknowledge. Matthias at 7, sick with fever. She'd stayed up 3 nights straight, cooling his forehead with damp cloths, forcing fluids, watching his small chest rise and fall. Thomas had been deployed, some fire in Oregon, and it had been just the 2 of them. When the fever finally broke and Matthias had opened his eyes and smiled at her, she'd felt a relief so profound it had made her dizzy. She'd been a good mother then, attentive, patient, willing to sacrifice sleep and comfort for her child's well-being. What had changed? When had fear replaced love as her primary operating system? She knew the answer. The Blackridge fire had changed everything. But that was still years away when Matthias was 7. The seeds had been planted earlier, she supposed. Her own father's death, fighting a wildfire when she was 12, her uncle's injuries, the burns that had left him scarred and broken. She'd grown up understanding that the forest could give life and take it with equal indifference. By the time Matthias was old enough to make his own choices, she'd already decided that her job was to protect him from the forest's indifference, to keep him safe, even if it meant keeping him close, even if it meant saying no to the very things that would have helped him become the man he needed to be. Scout whined softly, pulling her back to the present. She'd been pressing too hard on a tender spot, lost in thought. "Sorry," she said, gentling her touch. "I'm sorry." She finished the examination and sat back. He needed antibiotics, definitely, proper nutrition, supplements, time and care, things she could provide if she was willing to commit to it. The question was whether he was willing to fight for it. She could keep him alive, maybe, but she couldn't give him a reason to want to live. That had to come from him. She prepared a bowl of soft food rice. She boiled until it was mush, mixed with the fat from salt, pork, and a crushed vitamin tablet from her own supply. Not ideal, but better than dried jerky. She placed it within reach and moved back. Scout regarded the bowl for a long moment. Then, slowly, he pulled himself closer and began to eat. Not with enthusiasm, but with purpose. Fuel, she understood. He was treating it as fuel, giving his body what it needed without joy or anticipation. She understood that too. How many meals had she eaten just like that over the past 8 years? Food as function, nothing more. While he ate, she examined her own supplies, making a mental list of what she'd need if this was going to work. Her pension wouldn't stretch to cover much. $200 didn't go far when you were trying to bring a dying dog back from the edge. But she had credit at the feed store in Ridgeline, established over years of reliable payment. Maybe Vernon would extend credit too, if she asked. The idea of asking for help made her uncomfortable. She'd built her life around not needing anyone, not being beholden. But Scout's needs were going to push her outside that comfort zone, force her back into connection with people she'd been avoiding. Maybe that was part of the point. Maybe that was why she'd bought him in the first place, though she hadn't consciously realized it. By afternoon, the rain had intensified. The cabin felt smaller, darker, the walls pressing in. Scout had finished eating and returned to his spot near her bed, watching her with those intelligent eyes. "Tell me your story," Karrin said, settling into her chair with a cup of coffee. "What happened to you? What made them give up on you?" The dog's ears lifted slightly at her voice. He was listening, she realized, actually paying attention to her words, not just the tone. "I gave up on someone once," she continued, the words surprising her. She hadn't talked about this in years, hadn't even let herself think about it clearly. But something about Scout's presence, his non-judgmental attention, made confession easier. "My son, he wanted to follow in my footsteps, wanted to fight fires. And I was so scared of losing him that I pushed him away instead. Told him he wasn't ready, wasn't strong enough. Drove him right out of my life." Scout's tail moved slightly, not quite a wag, but acknowledgement. "He proved me wrong," she said. "Joined a crew anyway. And when the big fire came, the one I was coordinating, he was on the line. 20 years old, barely trained, and he was right in the middle of it, because I'd been too proud to admit I was wrong, too scared to reach out and bring him home." The memory of that day was still sharp. The radio reports coming in, coordinates that put Matthias's crew directly in the fire's path. Her having to make the call, send resources to evacuate families or protect the crew that included her son. She'd made the choice a warden should make, the professional choice. The choice that saved 32 people and left Matthias's crew to find their own way out through the flames. They'd survived, all of them, but Matthias had never forgiven her, and she'd never forgiven herself. "So you see," she told Scout, "I understand being given up on, and I understand giving up. But maybe we don't have to stay there. Maybe we can figure out something different." Scout closed his eyes, but his body had relaxed fully now. The tension that had been holding him rigid was gone. He trusted her, she realized, or at least he was willing to try. She finished her coffee and stood, moving to the window. The rain showed no sign of stopping. Tomorrow, if the road was passable, she'd go back to town. She'd swallow her pride and ask for credit, accept help, even though it made her uncomfortable. For Scout's sake, and maybe, if she was honest, for her own sake too. Because sitting here talking to a dog who couldn't answer back, she'd said more truth in 30 minutes than she'd spoken in 8 years. And somehow, that felt like progress. The afternoon faded toward evening. Karrin went about her usual routine, tending the stove, preparing her own simple dinner, checking the cabin's weatherproofing, but with constant awareness of Scout's presence. He was sleeping now, his breathing deep and regular. Real sleep, not the half-conscious state of before. Small victories. That's what recovery was built on. Small victories and stubborn refusal to give up. She could do that. She'd survived 8 years alone in these mountains. She'd survived the fire, the loss of Thomas, the estrangement from Matthias. She'd survived all of it by being stubborn and refusing to break. Maybe now she could use that stubbornness for something beyond mere survival. Maybe she could use it to actually heal something. The thought was terrifying. But as she looked at Scout sleeping peacefully near her bed, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Responsibility for another life. and with it, the faint possibility that she might be worth something after all. A week passed. Then two. Scout grew stronger, incrementally, each day bringing small improvements that Karrin tracked with careful attention. He could stand without shaking now, could walk short distances without his leg giving out. His coat had begun to show hints of shine where she'd managed to brush out the worst of the matting, but his eyes still held that distant quality, as if he was present in body but absent in spirit. He ate what she gave him, followed her on short walks around the cabin, even began to respond to his name. But there was no joy in him, no spark of the personality that must have existed before whatever had broken him. Karrin understood. She'd been living the same way for 8 years, going through motions, maintaining existence, but not really living. The morning came when she decided she couldn't put it off any longer. She needed to deal with the box in her closet, the bundle of letters that had been sitting there since she'd moved to the cabin. Letters from Matthias. All of them returned unopened. All of them marked "Return to sender" in her own handwriting. She'd never opened them. Had told herself it was because the past was past, because reading them would only bring pain, because some wounds were better left alone. But sitting with Scout night after night, talking to him about things she'd never said aloud, she'd begun to understand that the real reason was simpler and more cowardly. She was afraid. Afraid of what Matthias might have said, afraid of confronting her own guilt, afraid that reading his words would make the loss of him more real than she could bear. But Scout's presence had changed something, had created a crack in the walls she'd built around herself. And now she found herself pulling the box from the closet, carrying it to the table, untying the twine that held it closed. 23 letters. She counted them twice, as if the number mattered. 23 attempts by her son to reach her. 23 times she'd rejected him, without even knowing what he'd wanted to say. Scout watched from his spot by the stove. His eyes were clearer today, more focused. He seemed to understand this was significant, even if he couldn't know why. Karrin picked up the first envelope. The postmark read the 12th of August 2006, 1 year after the fire. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter inside was written on lined paper, the handwriting recognizable even after 20 years. Matthias had always had neat script, careful and precise. Like him. "Mom," it began. "I know you won't read this. I know you sent the last one back, but I'm going to keep trying because someone has to be the one who doesn't give up." The words hit her like physical blows. She had to stop, breathe, force herself to continue. "I'm not angry anymore. Or maybe I am, but I understand it better now. You made the call you had to make during the fire. I've been fighting fires for a year now, and I understand what it means to have to choose, to live with those choices. You saved those families. I know that. I know you did the right thing, professionally." Karrin's vision blurred. She wiped at her eyes impatiently, kept reading. "But I was your son, and you chose strangers over me. I know that's not fair. I know you were doing your job, but it's how I feel, and I think you feel the same way, which is why you won't talk to me. Because you can't forgive yourself either." The letter went on, describing his life. He was working out of Missoula, doing good work, learning from experienced crews. He'd met a girl named Rachel. He was thinking about going back to school, maybe studying forestry management. "I'm trying to build a life," he wrote, "and I'd like you to be part of it. I know I said terrible things that night I left. I know I hurt you. But we're both too stubborn to be the first one to reach out, and one of us has to break. So I'm breaking, Mum. I'm asking you to forgive me, and I'm forgiving you, whether you want me to or not." The letter was signed simply, "Your son, Matthias." Karrin set it down carefully, as if it might disintegrate. Her hands were shaking badly now. She looked at Scout, who was still watching her. "He forgave me," she said, "and I never even knew." She picked up the second letter. This one was dated 6 months later. It followed a similar pattern updates on his life, gentle overtures toward reconciliation, affection underneath the hurt. The third letter mentioned Rachel again. They were getting married. He wanted Karrin there but would understand if she couldn't come. "Just know you're invited," he wrote. "Just know you're wanted." She hadn't gone, hadn't even opened the invitation, had marked it "returned to sender" like all the rest. The fourth letter, fifth, sixth, they continued over years, charting a life she'd never been part of. Rachel became his wife. They bought a house. Rachel was pregnant. They had a daughter, Karrin's granddaughter, a child she'd never met, never even known existed. "Her name is Lily," Matthias wrote. "She has your eyes, Mom, dark and fierce." Rachel jokes that she's going to be trouble, just like her grandmother apparently was. A granddaughter, 9 years old now, if Karrin's math was right. Growing up without knowing she had a grandmother who'd chosen isolation over love, pride over family. The later letters grew more strained. Matthias was struggling, his marriage was failing. The work was getting harder as fires grew more intense, more destructive. He sounded tired, worn down by life, in ways that echoed Karrin's own exhaustion. "I could use some advice," one letter read. "I could use my mom, but I understand why you can't be that person. I just want you to know I still think about you, still love you, even though you've made it clear you don't want that love." The accusation stung, even though it was accurate. She had made it clear, had returned every letter, every attempt, every reaching out, had chosen her. Guilt over his forgiveness. The most recent letter was dated 6 months ago. The handwriting was shakier, more rushed. "Mom, I'm tired of being angry, tired of carrying this. Rachel and I are divorced. Lily's struggling with it. And I realize I'm repeating our pattern with her, pushing her away when I should be pulling her close. I can't do that. I won't do that. So I'm coming to find you. I don't know if you're still at the old cabin, but I'm going to try, because one of us has to break this cycle, and it looks like it's still going to be me." The letter was signed, as always, "Your son, Matthias." Karrin set the last letter down and sat in silence. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Even Scout had gone perfectly still, as if he understood the magnitude of what she'd just learned. Matthias had been coming to find her 6 months ago, but he'd never arrived. She stood abruptly, moved to the small desk where she kept important papers, rifled through until she found what she was looking for: a newspaper clipping from 2 months ago. She'd barely glanced at it when Vernon had included it with her mail, some story about lost hikers. She read it carefully now, her heart pounding. 2 hikers reported missing in the backcountry near Ridgeline. Names not yet released, pending notification of family. Search suspended due to severe weather, presumed dead. The date of the report was early September, right around when Matthias would have been coming to find her. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She'd let him go 20 years ago, had let him send 23 letters without responding. And now he'd come looking for her finally, after all that time, and she'd been 12 miles away, sitting in her cabin, refusing to read his words while he was out there somewhere, possibly dying. The guilt that had been manageable, compartmentalized, locked away, came flooding back with crushing weight. She'd thought she'd paid for her choices, had convinced herself that isolation was punishment enough, but it wasn't. It would never be enough. Scout stood and walked to her, pressed against her leg. The first time he'd initiated contact, she put her hand on his head and felt him lean into her touch. "I've wasted so much time," she said. "So much time being angry and afraid and proud. And now he might be gone, really gone. Not just estranged, but dead. And I'll never be able to tell him I'm sorry, never be able to say I loved him even when I couldn't show it." Scout whined softly, a sound of sympathy. Or maybe recognition. Maybe he understood what it meant to lose connection with something you needed. Karrin sank down to the floor, and Scout lay beside her. She put her arms around him and let herself cry for the first time since Thomas's funeral. For Matthias, for the years wasted, for the granddaughter she'd never met, for herself and her stubborn pride and her inability to forgive or be forgiven. Scout endured her tears, solid and warm against her. Reedley sighed. When she finally pulled herself together, wiped her face, he licked her hand once. Gentle, deliberate. "Thank you," she whispered. She stayed there on the floor. As afternoon turned to evening, Scout beside her, the letters spread across the table above. Outside, the first snow of the season had begun to fall. Winter was coming, cold and harsh and unforgiving. But inside the cabin, something had shifted. The walls Karrin had built around her heart had finally cracked wide enough to let something in. Pain, yes. Regret, certainly. But also truth. And with truth came the possibility, however faint, of change. She looked at Scout, at this dog nobody had wanted, this creature she'd bought for $1. He'd given her more in 2 weeks than she'd gotten from anything else in 8 years. A reason to speak, to care, to feel something beyond numbness. "We're going to figure this out," she told him. "Both of us. Together. I don't know how yet, but we will." Scout's tail moved. Just slightly. Just enough. It was the first time she'd seen him do that. And despite everything, the pain, the guilt, the loss, Karrin felt her mouth curve into something that might have been the beginning of a smile. Small victories. That's what they had. And maybe for now, that was enough. November brought snow in earnest, and with it a deepening cold that Karrin felt in her bones. Scout had transformed over the past weeks, gained weight, muscle returning to his frame, coat thick and glossy from proper nutrition. He followed her everywhere now, a shadow with watchful eyes and steady presence. They'd developed a routine. Morning rounds, checking the trapline, Scout ranging ahead but never so far that she couldn't see him. Afternoons, she'd work splitting wood, maintaining the cabin, tasks that Scout observed with intelligent attention. Evenings by the stove, Karrin reading aloud from books while Scout lay at her feet. She'd started with field guides, practical texts. But gradually she'd moved to the novels she'd abandoned years ago, finding comfort in reading stories to an audience who never judged, never interrupted. She talked to him constantly now. Told him things she'd never said to another living soul, about Thomas and their marriage, which had been good if not perfect, about her father and his death, about Matthias and the weight of regret that sat on her chest, making each breath a conscious effort. Scout listened, always, his eyes tracking her face, ears forward, entire being focused on her words. Sometimes she wondered if he understood more than seemed possible. If somehow her voice had become as necessary to him as his presence had become to her. But beneath the developing bond, beneath the daily routine, Karrin felt something building, a restlessness in Scout that she couldn't quite identify. He'd begun standing at the tree line in the evenings, staring into the darkness, whining softly. During their morning walks, he'd stop, nose the air, stance, shifting into something alert and purposeful. She recognized it finally. He was waiting for something, listening for something only he could hear. The wildfire map came back into her consciousness one evening as she was organizing supplies. She'd shoved it in a drawer months ago. Hadn't looked at it since that night. She'd traced the burn lines and remembered everything she'd tried to forget. But now she pulled it out, spread it across the table. The Black Ridge Fire, summer of 2005. 40,000 acres burned, 32 families evacuated. 0 casualties, which was the statistic everyone focused on. 0 casualties meant success, meant good management, meant she'd done her job. But statistics didn't account for the crew of volunteers trapped on the ridge, fighting their way through flames because resources had been diverted to civilian evacuation. Statistics didn't measure the trust broken between mother and son, didn't calculate the cost of 20 years' silence. Karrin traced the fire lines with her finger, the progression marked in different colors. Red for the first day, orange for the second, yellow for the third. By the fourth day, the entire valley had been burning, smoke visible from 3 states away. She'd been coordinating from Incident Command, watching reports come in, making decisions based on weather predictions and fuel loads and evacuation routes. Professional decisions, the kind she'd been trained to make. When the report came in that a volunteer crew was trapped on the eastern ridge, she'd had to choose: send resources to extract them or maintain the evacuation corridor for the families still fleeing. The families were confirmed 32 people, including 14 children, elderly, disabled. The crew was speculation, radio contact was spotty, their exact position unclear. She'd made the call, prioritized the confirmed threat over the possible one. It was the right choice, professionally. Any investigator would have agreed, any commander would have made the same decision. But she'd known, had known in her gut, even if she couldn't prove it, that Matthias was on that crew. Had felt it in the way mothers sometimes feel their children's danger across any distance. And she'd made the call anyway. The crew had survived, barely. 2 members suffered severe burns. Matthias had been among the least injured, though his lungs had taken damage from smoke inhalation that bothered him for years after. They'd made it out by abandoning protocol, by taking a desperate gamble that had paid off through luck as much as skill. When Matthias had returned to town, ash-blackened and exhausted and furious, he'd found her at the command center. Their conversation had been brief, brutal. "You knew," he'd said. "You knew we were up there." She couldn't deny it. "I didn't know for certain. And I had confirmed civilians. You chose them over me. I chose to do my job." He'd looked at her with something beyond anger, disappointment, disgust, understanding that she'd made her choice and it hadn't been him. "You've always chosen your job over me," he'd said quietly. "But I guess I hoped that when it really mattered, when my life was actually on the line, you'd choose different. Guess I was wrong." He'd walked away, and she'd let him go, because what could she say? That she'd been terrified? That every decision she'd made had been colored by the knowledge that her son was somewhere in that inferno? That professionalism had been the only thing keeping her from complete breakdown. She couldn't say any of that. So she'd said nothing. Scout's bark pulled her from the memory. Sharp, urgent, entirely unlike his usual sounds. She looked up to find him at the door, hackles raised, focused on something outside. Karrin moved quickly to the window, looked out into darkness broken only by snow reflecting moonlight. At first, she saw nothing. Then movement, a shadow crossing the clearing, too large for deer, wrong shape for elk. Bear, maybe. Or mountain lion. Either way, dangerous. She grabbed the rifle from above the door, checked the chamber. Scout was still barking, body rigid, every instinct telling him to act. "Easy," she told him. "Stay here." She opened the door carefully, rifle ready. The cold hit her immediately, sharp enough to take her breath. Scout pushed past her despite her command, bounded off the porch into the snow. "Scout, come back!" But he was gone, disappearing into the tree line, still barking. That purposeful, directional bark that had meaning she was beginning to understand. Alert bark. Search bark. He'd found something. Someone. Karrin's heart kicked into high gear. She grabbed her coat, shoved feet into boots, snatched up the emergency pack she kept ready. Years of training came flooding back. Never approach an unknown situation unprepared. Always bring supplies. Always have backup communication. The radio. She keyed it on, tuned to emergency. Frequency. "This is Karrin Hoyle, 12 miles north of Ridgeline. I may have an injured person in my area. Requesting information on any missing hikers or active searches." Static answered her. She repeated the call. This time a voice crackled through. "Karrin Hoyle, this is dispatch. We have 2 hikers reported missing as of 6 hours ago. Last known position, approximately 15 miles northeast of your location. Search and rescue is mobilizing, but weather is delaying helicopter deployment." 15 miles. In this terrain, in this weather, They could have wandered anywhere, could have gotten turned around, lost, hypothermic. "Copy that," Karrin said. "I have a dog." "Who's alerting?" "I'm going to investigate. We'll report back." She didn't wait for approval, just shoved the radio in her pack, tightened her coat, and followed Scout's tracks into the darkness. The temperature was dropping fast. She could feel it in the way the snow crunched under her boots, the way each breath burned her lungs. Dangerous conditions, the kind that killed people who were unprepared or unlucky. Scout's barking had stopped, but she could see his tracks clearly in the snow. He was heading northeast, moving with purpose, following something she couldn't see or smell or hear. Trust, she realized. This came down to trust. Scout had been trained for this, had instincts she didn't have, and after weeks of earning each other's confidence, she had to believe he knew what he was doing. The tracks led her into dense pine, terrain she knew well from her warden days. Quarter mile became half mile, became a full mile. Her legs burned from pushing through snow, her lungs aching from cold air. But Scout's tracks remained clear, purposeful. Then she heard his bark again, but different now. Not alert. Achievement. She found him in a small clearing, standing over something mostly buried in snow. As she approached with her flashlight, the something resolved into someone. A person, curled, against the base of a tree, covered in snow, not moving. Karrin dropped to her knees, brushing snow away. Young man, maybe early 30s. Hypothermic, definitely. She checked for pulse, faint but present, breathing shallow but there. "Good boy," she told Scout. "You found him. Good boy." Scout's tail was wagging now, that achievement response she'd read about in search and rescue dogs. He'd done his job. Found the lost person. Completed his purpose. But as Karrin worked to assess the man's condition, as she radioed in his location and began emergency treatment, a thought crept into her mind that she tried to push away but couldn't quite manage. Scout had known someone was out here before anyone had told her about missing hikers. Had been restless, searching, listening for days. As if he'd been waiting for this exact situation. As if this was what he'd been trained for all along, not just search and rescue in general, but something specific. Something he'd been listening for. Since the day she'd brought him home, the thought unsettled her. But there was no time to examine it now. The man was dying, and she had work to do. She opened her pack and got to work, Scout standing guard beside her, and tried not to think about the implications of what had just happened. Tried not to wonder what else Scout might know that she didn't. The storm hit with the sudden violence that high-altitude weather could bring. One moment Karrin was working to stabilize the hypothermic man. The next, the wind had picked up to the point where she could barely see Scout 3 feet away. Snow came horizontal, stinging her face, filling her tracks as fast as she made them. She'd radioed for help, but the response had been grim. Search and rescue couldn't deploy in these conditions. Helicopter was grounded. Ground teams would take hours to reach this location, if they could reach it at all. She was on her own until the storm passed. Karrin looked at the unconscious man, at Scout, watching her expectantly, and made the only decision she could make. She'd have to get him back to the cabin. 1 mile through whiteout conditions with a full-grown man who couldn't walk. Impossible by most standards. But Karrin Hoyle hadn't survived 8 years alone in the mountains by accepting impossible. She rigged a makeshift sled from the emergency tarp in her pack, secured the man as best she could. He was tall, heavy, dead weight. Every instinct told her this was suicide. Trying to drag him through this storm would likely kill them both. But leaving him here would definitely kill him. Scout seemed to understand what she was attempting. He positioned himself ahead of her, breaking trail, his larger paws finding purchase where hers wouldn't have. Smart dog. Working dog. He knew his role without being told. The journey back was nightmare made physical. Karrin's arms screamed within minutes, her back threatening to give out, her legs shaking with effort. The wind tore at her, tried to knock her down, succeeded twice. Both times she got back up, grabbed the tarp ropes, and kept pulling. Scout never wavered, never hesitated. He'd stop every 100 yards, look back to make sure she was still with him, then continue. His dark form was the only thing she could focus on in the white chaos. Without him, she would have been lost within minutes. Time stopped meaning anything. There was only the next step, the next pull, the burning in her muscles and lungs. She fell into a rhythm, pull, step, breathe, pull, step, breathe. Scout's bark would cut through the wind occasionally, guiding her, keeping her oriented. When the cabin finally materialized through the snow, Karrin almost didn't believe it was real. Her mind was so far gone into survival mode that the solid walls seemed like hallucination. But Scout was there, barking at the door, and that was real enough. She got the man inside, barely. Her strength was completely spent, her body running on pure stubbornness. She stripped his wet clothes protocol for hypothermia and wrapped him in every blanket she owned, built up the stove until the cabin was almost too hot, forced warm, not hot liquid between his blue lips. All the while Scout stayed close, watching, alert for any change in the man's condition. It was only after she'd done everything she could, only after she'd radioed in their status and heard the relief in the dispatcher's voice, that Karrin allowed herself to look at the man closely, and froze. His face was familiar, not in the way of someone you've met, but in the way of someone whose features you know because you gave them to him, the shape of his jaw, the line of his brow, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. With shaking hands, Karrin checked his pack, found his wallet, Karrin Hoyle. The name on the ID punched the air from her lungs. This man, this dying stranger she'd just spent the last hour saving, was her son. Her son had been coming to find her, and she'd almost lost him. Again. She sank into the chair beside his unconscious form, her hand reaching out to touch his face. 20 years since she'd seen him. He'd been a boy then, lanky and unformed. The man lying in her cabin was built solid, weathered by outdoor work, marked by time and experience, a stranger wearing her son's face. But it was him, Matthias, here, after all this time. Scout whined and pressed against her leg. She put her hand on his head automatically, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "You knew," she whispered to the dog. "Somehow you knew. That's what you've been listening for, waiting for." It made a terrible kind of sense. Scout had come from a rescue operation, had been part of something that went wrong, and now he'd found Matthias had led Karrin to him in the storm, as if that had been his purpose all along. The radio crackled, dispatch checking in. Karrin forced herself to respond, to give status updates, to sound professional and calm. But inside, she was anything but calm. She'd read his letters just days ago, had learned about the life he'd built, the daughter he'd raised, the pain he'd carried, had discovered he'd been coming to find her. And now here he was, barely alive, lying in her cabin because she'd bought a dying dog for $1, and that dog had somehow known to find him. The connections were too precise to be coincidence. But Karrin couldn't think about that now. Now she had to focus on keeping Matthias alive. She checked his vitals constantly through the night, core temperature slowly rising, pulse strengthening, breathing deepening, all good signs. But he remained unconscious, and that worried her. Hypothermia could cause brain damage, could steal cognition, even as the body recovered. Scout never left his side. The dog had positioned himself alongside Matthias, sharing body heat, keeping watch. When Karrin tried to move him so she could work, he'd growl, the first sound of aggression he'd ever made toward her. She backed off, understanding. Scout was protecting his patient. That's what he'd been trained to do. As dawn approached and the storm finally began to break, Karrin heard new sounds outside. Engines, voices. The search and rescue team had made it through. She opened the door to find 6 people in winter gear, led by a weathered man in his 50s she vaguely recognized from her warden days. Karrin Hoyle? His eyes widened in recognition. "Tom said you died up here." "Not yet," she said. "The hiker's inside. Hypothermic but stable. He's my son." The words felt strange in her mouth. My son. 20 years of silence, and that was how she reclaimed him, to strangers on her doorstep in the aftermath of a storm. They moved efficiently, checking Matthias, preparing him for transport. One of the paramedics, a woman maybe 30, examined Scout with professional interest. "That's a trained SAR dog," she said. "Where'd you get him?" "Trading post in Ridgeline," Karrin said. "They told me he was dangerous, that he'd attacked someone." The paramedic frowned. "That's Ranger. We've been looking for him for 6 months. He disappeared after—" She stopped, looked at Matthias, then back at Karrin. "After the incident where his handler was injured, we thought he'd died in the backcountry." "Ranger," Karrin repeated. The name felt wrong, but also right. More official than Scout, more formal. A working name. "He was on a specialized team," the paramedic continued. "Long-range search and rescue. He'd been trained specifically to—" Again she stopped, looked at Matthias, "to find missing persons in wilderness conditions. His handler was one of the best, but there was an accident. The handler was injured, blamed Ranger, said he'd become unpredictable. Ranger was scheduled to be euthanized, but he escaped before they could." The pieces assembled themselves in Karrin's mind. Ranger Scout had been Matthias's dog. Had to be. That's why he'd known. To search. Why he'd been listening, waiting. He'd been trying to find his handler, to complete whatever mission he'd been trained for. And somehow, impossibly, he'd ended up in a wire cage in Vernon's trading post, where Karrin had bought him for $1, and he'd led her to the son she'd lost 20 years ago. The team prepared to move Matthias to the helicopter that had landed once the storm cleared. Karrin watched them work, feeling disconnected from her body, from the situation, from everything. The lead rescuer approached her. "You saved his life. The other hiker, his partner, we found her this morning. She didn't make it. If you hadn't gotten to your son when you did, he'd have been the same." "Other hiker, partner. Where is she?" Karrin asked. "Still at the scene. We'll recover her once we get your son to the hospital." Karrin looked at Scout at Ranger, who was still pressed against Matthias's side. "He found them both, didn't he? Found her first. Then led me to Matthias." The rescuer nodded slowly. "That's what it looks like. He followed protocol, check both subjects, prioritize the one most likely to survive, alert the rescuer. That's advanced training. Not many dogs can do it." They loaded Matthias onto the stretcher. As they prepared to carry him out, his eyes fluttered open. Confused, disoriented, but conscious, his gaze found Karrin, standing in the doorway of her cabin. For a long moment they stared at each other. Then his lips moved, forming a single word. "Mom." Karrin's throat closed. She managed a nod. Matthias's hand reached out, shaking. She stepped forward, took it. His fingers closed around hers with surprising strength. "Found you," he whispered. Then his eyes closed again, but his hand didn't release hers. "We need to go," the paramedic said gently. "You can ride with us if you want. Come to the hospital." Karrin looked at her cabin, at Scout, at the life she'd built around isolation and guilt. Then she looked at her son, unconscious but alive, holding her hand. "Yes," she said. "I'm coming." Scout barked once, that same achievement bark from earlier, as if everything had gone exactly according to plan, as if he'd known all along how this would end. Karrin didn't understand it. Didn't understand how a dying dog could find a lost son, how $1 could buy redemption, how the things you'd given up on could find their way back. But as they loaded into the helicopter and lifted off into the clearing sky, Scout pressed against her side and Matthias's hand still in hers, she decided understanding wasn't necessary. Some things you just had to accept as grace. The hospital in Billings was too bright, too warm, too full of people and sounds and smells that made Karrin's skin itch. She'd spent 3 hours in the waiting room, Scout Ranger at her feet, both of them drawing curious stares from staff and visitors. Service dogs were common enough in hospitals, but a German shepherd with visible signs of recent hardship, sitting beside a mountain woman who looked like she'd walked out of another century, made for unusual scenery. A doctor finally emerged, a tired-looking man in his 40s with kind eyes and efficient movements. "Mrs. Hoyle?" "Miss," Karrin corrected automatically. "I'm his mother." The doctor nodded, consulting his tablet. "Your son is stable. Core temperature has normalized, no signs of brain damage or permanent injury from the hypothermia. He's extremely lucky. Another hour and we'd be having a different conversation." Relief made Karrin's knees weak. She sat back down. "Can I see him?" "He's awake, asking for you. Room 312. The doctor paused. "There's something else. We found a note in his belongings. It's addressed to you." He handed her a folded piece of paper, sealed in a plastic bag. Evidence, Karrin realized, in case this had gone differently. In case they'd needed to notify next of kin. "Thank you," she managed. The walk to room 312 felt endless. Scout kept pace beside her, his training evident in the way he navigated the crowded corridors, avoided obstacles, maintained position. This was a dog who'd worked in public, who knew how to behave in high-stress environments. Karrin wondered what else he remembered from his training, what else he might still be capable of. She stopped outside Matthias's door, suddenly terrified. 20 years. She had no idea what to say to him, how to bridge that gap, where to even begin. Scout nosed her hand, looked up at her with those intelligent eyes. "Trust yourself," they seemed to say. "You've come this far." She opened the door. Matthias was propped up in bed, connected to IVs and monitors, but his eyes were clear and focused. He watched her enter, his expression unreadable. The years had changed him, carved lines around his eyes and mouth, added grey at his temples, built muscle and scars that spoke of outdoor work and physical demands. But underneath it all, she could still see her son. The boy who'd loved climbing trees and collecting rocks and asking questions about everything. "Mom," he said quietly. "Matthias." Her voice broke on his name. They stared at each other across the room. Scout solved the impasse by walking to the bed, tail wagging. Matthias's eyes widened. "Ranger! Oh my God, Ranger!" His hands reached for the dog, buried themselves in thick fur. Scout whined, practically vibrating with joy. "They told me you were dead. They told me—" His voice caught. How did you, trading post in Ridgeline?" Karrin said, finding her voice. 2 weeks ago, they said he was dangerous, said he'd attacked someone. I bought him for $1. Matthias looked from the dog to her, then began to laugh. It started quiet, almost disbelieving, then built into something that might have been laughter or crying or both. "You bought my dog. You bought Ranger. I didn't know he was yours." I know you didn't." Matthias pressed his face into Ranger's neck, his shoulders shaking. "I thought I'd lost him, thought I'd lost everything." Karrin took a step closer, then another. "What happened?" "The paramedic said there was an incident, that you were injured, that Ranger was blamed." Matthias pulled back, his face wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. "It wasn't his fault. We were on a search, missing kid, bad terrain. I fell, broke my leg in 3 places. Ranger stayed with me, kept me alive for 2 days until they found us. But when the rescue team approached, I was delirious from pain and infection. I didn't recognize them, thought they were a threat. Started fighting. Ranger was protecting me, did what he was trained to do, defended his handler." He looked at the dog, guilt evident in his expression. "I didn't remember most of it. By the time I was coherent enough to tell them what really happened, they'd already labeled him dangerous, started proceedings to have him put down. My ex-wife, she'd been pushing for me to quit search and rescue, said it was too dangerous. She used the incident as leverage. Said if I didn't leave the team, she'd file for full custody of Lily." The pain in his voice was raw, immediate. "I chose my daughter, chose to walk away from the work I loved, from my team. From Ranger. I thought they'd find him a new handler. Thought he'd be okay. But the evaluation board decided he was too unpredictable, ordered him euthanized. Matthias's hands tightened in Ranger's fur. I tried to fight it, hired a lawyer, appealed the decision, but before I could get anywhere, Ranger escaped from the holding facility. They searched for weeks, found nothing. Everyone assumed he'd died in the wilderness. And I couldn't even grieve him properly because I was fighting to keep my daughter, fighting to keep my marriage together, fighting just to get through each day. He looked at Karrin. That's when I started writing to you again. After years of just existing, going through motions. I was so angry with you for so long, Mum. But losing Ranger, losing my marriage, losing the work I loved, it made me understand something. Anger takes too much energy. And life's too short to waste on pride. Karrin felt tears tracking down her own face now. I read your letters. Finally. All 23 of them. Matthias's eyes widened. You did? 2 weeks ago, the same day I bought Ranger. I'd been sitting with him, talking to him about everything. About you. And I realized I couldn't keep hiding. Couldn't keep pretending that isolation was the same as healing. She moved closer, sat in the chair beside his bed. I'm so sorry, Matthias. For the fire, for pushing you away, for being too proud and too scared to read your letters, for wasting 20 years we could have... Stop. His hand reached for hers, took it. I forgave you years ago. You read the letters. You know that. But I didn't forgive myself. I know. I didn't forgive myself either. For leaving, for the things I said, for being too stubborn to come back sooner. He squeezed her hand. But I'm here now. And somehow, impossibly, you saved my life. You and Ranger. Karrin looked at the dog, who was watching them both with alert attention. He knew. I don't understand how, but he knew you were out there. He was listening for something, waiting. When the storm came and you were lost, he found you. That's what he was trained to do, Matthias said quietly. Long-range search and rescue. We specialized in finding people who'd been missing for days, sometimes weeks. Ranger was the best tracking dog in the region. He could find anyone. But how did he end up at Vernon's trading post? That's 200 miles from where you lost him. Matthias shook his head slowly. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Unless... He stopped, thinking. Unless he was looking for me. Dogs have been known to travel incredible distances to find their handlers. And Ranger knew I came from this area, had probably caught my scent on my gear. Maybe he tracked me here. For 6 months? He's done longer searches, and he's brilliant. If any dog could find their way across 200 miles of wilderness, it would be him. The implication settled over them. Ranger had escaped, had traveled hundreds of miles, had survived alone in the backcountry for half a year, all to find Matthias. And through impossible coincidence, or something beyond coincidence, he'd ended up in a cage where Matthias's estranged mother would find him, would buy him for $1, would earn his trust, would be in position to save Matthias when he finally arrived, searching for her. The connections were too precise, too perfect, as if the universe had spent 20 years setting up this exact moment. There's more, Matthias said, his voice rough. Jessica, the woman I was with, she was my hiking partner. We were coming to find you together. She wanted to help me. She knew about our history, about the letters. His eyes filled with tears again. They told me she didn't make it. That ranger found her, but it was too late. Karrin's chest tightened. I'm sorry. She was a good person, a good friend. She didn't deserve. He broke off, unable to continue. They sat in silence, hands clasped, Ranger between them. The monitor beeped steadily, marking time passing, life continuing despite loss and pain and accumulated regret. Finally, Matthias spoke again. I have a daughter, Lily. She's 9. She's with my ex-wife in Missoula. I know. I read about her in your letters. I want you to meet her. I want—" his voice cracked. "I want her to know her grandmother. To know that family doesn't have to be broken forever, that people can find their way back to each other." Karrin felt something in her chest crack wide open. "I'd like that. Very much. She's coming tomorrow." Rachel agreed to bring her once she heard what happened. Rachel's not a bad person. We just wanted different things. But she knows how much you mean to me. How much I wanted this." He pulled his hand free, reached for the plastic bag on his bedside table. "The doctor gave me this. The note I was carrying. I wrote it before we left, in case something happened, in case I didn't make it." He held it out to her. "You should read it." Karrin took the bag, removed the folded paper with shaking hands. Matthias's familiar handwriting, hastier than in his letters, but still recognizable. "Mom," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it to you. Means I waited too long, was too proud, let too many years pass. I'm sorry for that. Sorry for all of it. But I want you to know I never stopped loving you, never stopped missing you, never stopped hoping that someday we'd figure out how to be family again. Whatever happened between us, whatever mistakes we made, I forgive you. I hope you can forgive me too. And I hope you can forgive yourself. Life's too short for anything else. Your son, always, Matthias." Karrin read it twice, 3 times, each word a gift she didn't deserve, but desperately needed. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For not giving up on me. For 20 years of letters I didn't read. For coming to find me even when you had every reason not to. For forgiving me when I couldn't forgive myself." Matthias smiled, tired but genuine. "That's what family does." Ranger barked once, as if in agreement. They both laughed, the sound breaking the tension, making the moment feel suddenly lighter despite everything. "So what now?" Matthias asked. Karrin looked at her son, at the dog who'd brought them back together, at the impossible chain of events that had led to this moment. "Now we start over," she said. "Now we figure out how to be family again. However that looks. I'd like that." "Me too." Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Winter was coming, cold and harsh, as always. But for the first time in 20 years, Karrin wasn't facing it alone. She had her son back. She had Ranger. She had a granddaughter she'd never met but already loved. She had a second chance, and this time she wasn't going to waste it. The hospital gave Matthias a room for 3 days while they monitored his recovery. Karrin didn't leave. She slept in the chair beside his bed, Ranger on the floor between them, and for the first time in 8 years, she didn't dream of fire and smoke and choices she couldn't take back. They talked, tentatively at first, carefully navigating 20 years of silence, but gradually with more ease. Matthias told her about his life, the good years when his marriage was working, the satisfaction of search and rescue work, the way it felt to find someone who'd been lost and bring them home. He told her about Lily, how she was smart and stubborn, and asked questions about everything, just like he had as a boy. "She asks about you," he admitted on the second day. "Has for years. I've shown her pictures, the old ones, from when I was a kid. Told her you were—" He hesitated. "Dead?" Karrin supplied quietly. "Lost," he corrected. "I told her you were lost, but that maybe someday we'd find you." Karrin absorbed that. Not dead, lost. A crucial distinction that spoke to hope she hadn't known he carried. "And now you have." "Now we have," he agreed. She told him about her years in the cabin, about Thomas's death and the retreat into isolation that had felt like the only way to survive the accumulated weight of loss and guilt, about the morning she'd walked into Vernon's trading post and seen Ranger in that cage and made the impulsive choice that had changed everything. "Do you believe in fate?" Matthias asked. Because the odds of all this happening, you buying Ranger, him leading you to me, us being reunited after 20 years, it's statistically impossible. I don't know what I believe, Karrin admitted, but I know I'm grateful. On the third day, Rachel arrived with Lily. Karrin saw them coming down the hospital corridor, a woman in her late 30s with kind eyes and practical clothes, holding the hand of a small girl with dark hair and Karrin's own fierce gaze. Her granddaughter, Karrin, stood, suddenly terrified again. What did you say to a child you'd never met? How did you explain 20 years of absence? How did you ask for forgiveness from someone too young to understand what there was to forgive? But Lily didn't give her time to worry. She looked at Karrin, then at Ranger, then her face lit up with uncomplicated joy. Your grandma, and that's Ranger. Daddy said you found each other. She launched herself at Karrin with the fearless enthusiasm of a 9-year-old who hadn't learned yet that reunions could be complicated. Karrin caught her, feeling small arms wrap around her waist, smelling the child scent of shampoo and something sweet. Hello, Lily, she managed, her voice thick with emotion. You're really real, Lily said, pulling back to study Karrin's face. Dad showed me pictures, but I thought maybe you were just a story. But you're real. I'm real, Karrin confirmed. Rachel approached more cautiously, offered her hand. Mrs. Hoyle, I'm Rachel. It's good to finally meet you. Karrin, please, and thank you for bringing Lily, for letting Matthias keep trying to find me even when you didn't want to be found. Rachel's voice was gentle, not judgmental. He loved you, still loves you. That doesn't go away just because someone's stubborn. She glanced at Matthias, who was watching the scene from his hospital bed with an expression of such naked hope it made Karrin's chest ache. We had our problems, Matthias and I, but one thing I always knew: he was capable of incredible loyalty. Once he loved someone, he didn't give up on them. I just wish, she stopped, smiled sadly. I wish I'd been able to be what he needed. But I couldn't compete with his first love. The mountains, Karrin said, understanding. The work, Rachel corrected. The search and rescue. The need to find lost things and bring them home. I wanted stability. Safety. A husband who came home every night. That's not wrong, but it wasn't what he could give me. She looked at Lily, who was now sitting beside Matthias's bed, petting Ranger with reverent attention. But he's a wonderful father, and she needs him. Needs both of you, actually. Kids need family, especially when their parents can't make it work. The words were permission and plea at once. Karrin heard what Rachel wasn't saying. Don't disappear again. Don't break their hearts a second time. I won't leave, Karrin said quietly. Not again. Rachel nodded, satisfied. Good. Because that little girl has been asking about her grandmother for 3 years, and Matthias needs you, even if he's too proud to say it clearly. She stayed for an hour, helping Lily settle, making sure Matthias had everything he needed. When she left, she squeezed Karrin's shoulder briefly. Take care of them. They're good people. I know, Karrin said. I will. After Rachel left, the 4 of them, Karrin, Matthias, Lily and Ranger, settled into an easy quiet. Lily had brought books and her tablet, but she seemed content to just be present, asking occasional questions about Ranger's training, or Karrin's cabin, or what it was like living in the mountains. Karrin answered as honestly as she could, not sugarcoating the isolation or the difficulty, but also describing the peace of it. The way sunrise looked from her porch, the sound of elk bugling in autumn, the satisfaction of being self-sufficient. Can I visit? Lily asked. Can I come see your cabin? Karrin looked at Matthias, who nodded encouragement. I'd like that very much. When Dad's better, we'll come. All of us. It'll be like an adventure. An adventure. When was the last time Karrin had who thought of anything as an adventure? When had life become something to endure rather than experience? The doctor released Matthias on the fourth day with instructions to rest, physical therapy appointments scheduled, pain medication prescribed. They drove back toward the mountains in Karrin's truck, Matthias in the passenger seat, Lily in the back with Ranger, everyone quiet with the weight of new beginnings and old reconnections. Karrin had cleaned the cabin before leaving for the hospital, made up the spare bed she'd never used, stocked supplies for more than one person. The space that had felt adequate for solitary living seemed cramped now with 4 inhabitants, but somehow that felt right. Life was supposed to be a little cramped, a little crowded. That's what family meant. The first week was adjustment, learning to live with other people again, remembering how to account for someone else's needs and preferences. Matthias was still weak, moving carefully, sleeping long hours. As his body recovered, Lily explored everything with boundless curiosity, asking questions, finding treasures in Karrin's simple belongings. "You have so many books about trees," she observed. "Do you love trees?" "I respect them," Karrin said. "There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Love is emotional. Respect is earned through understanding. I understand what trees can do, how they grow, how they burn, how they heal. That makes me respect them." Lily considered this seriously. "I think I respect Ranger. He's very smart." "He is. He saved your father's life." "I know. Dad told me." She paused. "Did you save Dad's life too?" "Ranger did the important part. I just helped." "But you went out in the storm. You brought him back. That's saving someone." Karrin felt the weight of the child's gaze, the way children saw through complications to simple truth. "Yes, I suppose I did. Thank you for saving my dad." 3 words, but they cracked something open in Karrin that she'd kept sealed shut for decades. "You're welcome," she managed. The nights were the hardest. Karrin would lie awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other people sleeping. Matthias's steady breathing, Lily's occasional mumbles, Ranger's soft snoring. She'd spent so long alone that the presence of others felt like an intrusion, even as she desperately wanted them there. One night she found Matthias awake too, standing at the window looking at the mountains silvered by moonlight. "Can't sleep?" she asked quietly. "Thinking," he said. "About Jessica, about how close I came to." He stopped. "I know." They stood together in silence. Finally Matthias spoke again. "I want to do something. For Jessica. A memorial, maybe. Something to mark that she was here, that she mattered." "We could plant a tree," Karrin suggested, "at the spot where Ranger found her. Something that would grow and give life back to the place where she died." Matthias nodded slowly. "She'd like that. She always said she wanted to be part of the mountains when she died. Wanted to return to them. Then we'll do it. When you're strong enough. All of us together." He turned to look at her. "Thank you for letting me be here, for letting Lily be here, for giving us this chance." "You gave me the chance," Karrin corrected. 20 years of chances. I'm the one who finally took it. We both made mistakes. Yes. But we're here now. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Matthias said quietly. The second week brought physical therapy appointments in town, which meant long drives and waiting rooms and the exhaustion of medical bureaucracy. But it also brought routine, structure, the slow building of new patterns. Lily started temporary online school from the cabin, sprawled on the floor with her tablet, while Ranger dozed beside her. Matthias worked on his strength, walking a little farther each day, his body remembering the physical capability that injury and hypothermia had temporarily stolen. Karrin found herself teaching Lily things she'd taught Matthias years ago: how to read weather, how to identify trees, how to move through forest without disturbing the balance. The girl was bright, attentive, fearless in ways that reminded Karrin of herself at that age. "You're a natural teacher," Matthias observed one afternoon, watching Karrin show Lily how to start a fire using different materials. "I was a warden," Karrin said. Teaching was part of the job. It's more than that. You're patient with her. Let her make mistakes and figure things out. That's how people learn. Not everyone understands that. I wish. He stopped. But Karrin knew what he'd been about to say. I wish you'd been this patient with me. I was afraid, she said quietly. When you were growing up. Afraid you'd get hurt. Afraid I'd lose you. That fear made me controlling instead of patient, made me push you away when I should have held on looser. I know. I understand that now. Being a parent, it's terrifying. Every day, I'm afraid something will happen to Lily. But I can't let that fear stop me from letting her live. You're a better parent than I was. I had a good example of what not to do, he said with a small smile. And also, you weren't all bad, Mum. You taught me about the forest, about respecting nature, about self-sufficiency. Those are the things I'm teaching Lily now. The good parts without the controlling parts. Exactly. It was the closest they'd come to directly addressing the past, to acknowledging the hurt and the lessons learned from it. Karrin felt something settle in her chest, not quite forgiveness, but acceptance. They'd both made mistakes, they'd both paid for them, and now they were both trying to do better. That was enough. It had to be enough. The third week brought the first serious snow. Karrin woke to find the world transformed, white and pristine and silent. Lily pressed her face against the window, delighted. Matthias was moving better, almost back to his normal strength. I think we should do it today, he said. Plant Jessica's tree. Before the ground freezes completely. Karrin checked the weather forecast clear for the next 6 hours. We'd need to move fast. The location is 3 miles from here. I can make it. Are you sure? He met her eyes. I need to do this. Need to say goodbye properly. So they bundled up all of them, including Ranger, and set out. Karrin had already prepared the young pine sapling, had dug the hole 2 days ago, and covered it to keep it from freezing. The walk took longer than it would have before Matthias's injury, but they moved at a steady pace, Lily sometimes running ahead, sometimes dropping back to walk with Karrin. The place where Jessica had died was marked by searchers with a small orange flag. Someone had left flowers, though they were frozen now, preserved in ice. Matthias stood looking at the spot for a long time, his expression distant. Then he knelt and began to clear snow from the prepared hole. Karrin helped him settle the sapling, showed Lily how to pack earth around the roots, explained how to water it properly when spring came. This tree will grow here, Karrin said. We'll put down roots and reach for sky. We'll be part of this place forever. That's a good memorial. Matthias nodded, unable to speak. Lily slipped her hand into his, and they stood together looking at the small tree that would, in time, grow strong and tall. Goodbye, Jessica, Matthias finally said. Thank you for coming with me. Thank you for being my friend. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. The words hung in the cold air. Then Ranger barked, once sharp, clear, purposeful. Everyone turned to look at him. He was staring into the tree line, body tense, alert. Karrin felt her heart rate spike. What is it, boy? Ranger barked again, then began moving toward the trees. Not his search bark. Something else. Something Karrin didn't recognize. Should we follow him? Lily asked. Matthias was already moving, his training overriding caution. He's found something. Come on. They pushed through snow into the tree line, following Ranger's dark form. The dog moved with purpose, no hesitation, leading them deeper into the forest. And then he stopped. Saturday, the position Karrin recognized now as his alert signal, found. They caught up to find him sitting beside a small cave opening, partially hidden by fallen logs and snow. What is it? Lily whispered. Matthias moved forward carefully, peered into the darkness. Then his sharp intake of breath. Mom, we need the emergency kit. Now. Karrin pulled it from her pack, handed it over. Matthias disappeared into the cave opening. Long seconds passed. Then his voice shaking, "She's alive. Oh God, Jessica's alive." For a moment time stopped. Then everything happened at once. Karrin was moving, pulling emergency supplies, barking orders like she'd never stopped being a warden. Matthias was in the cave, his voice coming out in urgent fragments. "She's breathing, pulse weak, hypothermic, been here the whole time. Lily, take Ranger back to the trail marker," Karrin commanded. "Stay there. If anyone comes looking for us, tell them we're here. Can you do that?" The girl's face was pale but determined. "Yes. Good girl. Go. Now." Lily ran, Ranger at her heels. Karrin crawled into the cave opening, her heart hammering. The space was small, barely large enough for 2 adults. And there, pressed against the back wall, wrapped in what looked like a thermal blanket, was Jessica. She was barely conscious, her face grey, her breathing shallow. But she was alive. Against all odds, after 3 weeks of everyone believing she was dead, she was alive. "How is this possible?" Karrin breathed. "The cave," Matthias said, his hands already moving through assessment procedures, checking vitals, looking for injuries. "It must have provided shelter. She had the emergency blanket that would have helped. But 3 weeks without food, minimal water, we need to get her out, get her warm. Now." They worked together with the efficiency of people who'd both done emergency medicine in the field. Karrin stabilized Jessica's neck and spine while Matthias prepared to move her. Every movement was careful, deliberate, but also as fast as they could manage because every second counted. Jessica's eyes fluttered open briefly as they lifted her. Her lips moved, forming words no sound came out to complete. But Karrin read them anyway. "Matthias. Found you." "We found you," Matthias said, his voice breaking. "Jessica, we found you. You're going to be okay. Stay with me, stay with me." Getting her out of the cave was brutal work. The opening was narrow, her body dead weight. But they managed it, emerging into the cold afternoon light with their impossible cargo. Jessica lay in the snow, not moving now, her breathing so shallow. Karrin had to watch carefully to confirm it was happening at all. Matthias was on the radio immediately, calling for emergency evacuation. His voice was steady, professional, giving coordinates and medical information without hesitation. This was what he'd trained for. This was what he knew. While he coordinated rescue, Karrin worked on Jessica. The woman had lost significant weight, was severely dehydrated, possibly had internal injuries or infections they couldn't see. But she was alive. That was the miracle. That was what mattered. Lily appeared with Ranger, both of them moving quickly through the snow. "I heard the helicopter," Lily panted. "It's coming." "Good," Karrin said. "You did good, sweetheart." The next 20 minutes were organized chaos. The helicopter arrived, medics taking over with practiced efficiency. Jessica was loaded onto a stretcher, hooked to IVs, surrounded by people whose entire job was keeping her alive long enough to reach the hospital. One of the medics, a woman Karrin vaguely recognized from the first rescue, looked at them with open astonishment. "You're sure this is Jessica Torres, the hiker we presumed dead 3 weeks ago?" "That's her," Matthias confirmed. "How did you find her?" Matthias looked at Ranger, who sat calmly watching the proceedings. "The dog. He knew she was still out here. Led us right to her." The medic shook her head slowly. I don't even know what that is. Impossible, maybe. But here we are." They loaded into the helicopter, all of them this time. No one was getting left behind. Not again. Karrin held Lily close as they lifted off, the child's body shaking either from cold or emotion or both. Matthias sat beside Jessica, holding her hand, his face wet with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. And Ranger sat with his head on Matthias's knee, looking remarkably pleased with himself. "Did you know?" Karrin asked the dog quietly. "All this time, did you know she was still alive?" Ranger's tail wagged once. His eyes, those intelligent, knowing eyes, seemed to hold answers she'd never be able to fully understand. The flight to Billings took 30 minutes. Jessica was rushed into emergency care the moment they landed. Doctors and nurses swarmed, shouting medical terminology, moving with urgent purpose. Then she was gone behind swinging doors, and they were left in another waiting room, the same one they'd occupied 3 weeks ago, coming full circle. Matthias sat with his head in his hands. Lily pressed against Karrin's side. Ranger lay at their feet, finally showing signs of exhaustion. "She's going to make it," Karrin said, because she had to believe that. Because surviving 3 weeks in a cave in winter only to die in a hospital would be too cruel, even for a universe that had already demonstrated its capacity for cruelty. "She has to," Matthias agreed. "After all this, after everything, she has to make it." They waited. And in the waiting, Karrin felt the full weight of what had just happened settle over her. They'd found Jessica alive. After everyone had given up, after the memorial, after 3 weeks of presumed death, they'd found her alive. Because of Ranger. Because of a dog nobody wanted, bought for $1, who'd refused to give up on his mission even when everyone else had declared it over. A dog who'd reunited a family, saved a life, and proven that sometimes the things nobody else values are actually priceless. Karrin looked at him lying there. This German shepherd with haunted eyes that were less haunted every day. This rescue dog who'd needed rescuing himself. This dollar purchase that had cost everything and given back more than she'd ever imagined possible. "Thank you," she whispered to him, "for finding them, for finding all of us." Ranger's tail thumped once against the tile floor, his eyes closed, and for the first time since she'd bought him, Karrin saw him truly relax. As if his mission was finally, completely accomplished. As if he'd brought everyone home. The doctor who emerged 6 hours later looked exhausted but cautiously optimistic. "She's stable. Critical, but stable. The next 48 hours will tell us more, but—" He shook his head, still seeming to process the impossibility of it. "She shouldn't be alive. By any medical standard, what she survived shouldn't have been survivable. But she is alive," Matthias said. "She is. Severely malnourished, dehydrated, hypothermic, some frostbite we'll need to monitor. But her organs are functioning. She's responding to treatment. It's—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's remarkable. They were allowed to see her briefly." Jessica lay surrounded by machines, tubes and wires, connecting her to systems, keeping her alive. Her face was almost skeletal, her skin grey, but her chest rose and fell with steady rhythm. Matthias approached the bed slowly, took her hand carefully between both of his. "Hey, Jessica, it's Matthias. You're in the hospital. You're safe now. You're going to be okay." Her eyes opened barely, just slits but opened, her fingers tightened fractionally on his. "You found me," she whispered, the words barely audible. "You survived," he corrected. "You survived, and Ranger found you and brought us to you. That was all you. So cold, so hungry, kept thinking I should give up. But I remembered." She stopped, gathering strength. "Remembered what you said about your mom, about never giving up on finding her." Tears tracked down Matthias's face. "You saved yourself by being stubborn. Runs in families," she managed. Then her eyes found Karrin standing at the foot of the bed. "You're her." "Matthias's mum. I'm Karrin," she confirmed. "It's good to finally meet you, Jessica. I'm sorry it took so long." "Worth the wait," Jessica breathed. Then her eyes closed again, exhaustion pulling her back under. The doctor ushered them out. "She needs rest. You all do. Come back tomorrow." But in the hallway, Matthias sagged against the wall, the adrenaline finally draining away and leaving only exhaustion and emotion. "I thought she was dead. For 3 weeks I thought she was dead, and I'd failed her. Failed to find her in time." "But you didn't," Karrin said firmly. "She's alive. Against all odds she's alive. Because of Ranger. Because of you. Because somehow He looked at his mother, really looked at her. Because somehow, buying a dying dog for $1 set all of this in motion. Do you understand how impossible that is? Karrin thought about the wire cage, the crumpled dollar bill, the moment she'd decided to take a chance on something nobody else wanted. I understand that sometimes the smallest choices have the biggest consequences, and that sometimes we get second chances we don't deserve. Third chances, Matthias corrected. Fourth, however many it takes. Lily had fallen asleep in one of the waiting room chairs, curled up with Ranger lying on the floor beside her. They looked peaceful, the child and the dog, like they'd always belonged together. She's going to want to keep him, Matthias said quietly. Ranger, I mean, she's already in love with him. He's your dog. He was my working dog, my partner. But after the incident, after everything, I don't know if I can go back to that work. Don't know if Rachel would let me even if I wanted to. He looked at Ranger, at the steady rise and fall of the dog's breathing. But Lily needs him. Needs something stable, something that won't leave or change or get caught up in adult complications. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe Ranger's mission isn't done. Maybe he found me so he could find his real purpose, which was leading me back to you and leading us to Jessica and... He paused, and being exactly what a 9-year-old girl needs. Constant, loyal, protective. Karrin felt something settle in her chest. You're going to stay. In the area, I mean. If you'll have us. If there's room in that cabin for family. There's room, she said immediately. There's always been room. I had to make room in myself first. Matthias pulled her into an embrace, sudden and tight. Karrin stiffened for just a moment. She'd gone so long without physical affection, then relaxed into it. Let herself be held by her son for the first time in 20 years. I love you, Mom, he said into her shoulder. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped loving you either, she whispered back. I just forgot how to show it. But I'm going to learn again. I promise. They stayed like that for a long moment, two people who'd been lost, finding their way back to each other. Then Lily stirred, mumbled something in her sleep. Ranger lifted his head, checking on his charge, then settled back down when he confirmed she was safe. We should get them home, Karrin said. Get some real rest. We can come back tomorrow. Home, Matthias repeated, testing the word. I like the sound of that. Me too, Karrin admitted. Me too. They gathered their things, woke Lily gently, made their way back to the truck. The drive to the cabin was quiet, everyone exhausted beyond words. But it was a good quiet, Karrin thought. The kind of quiet that came from being with people you loved, where silence was comfortable rather than isolating. When they reached the cabin, the moon was full, painting everything silver and blue. Smoke rose from the chimney. Karrin had left the stove banked, and it was still going. The porch light was on. It looked, Karrin thought, like a home that was lived in, like a place where people belonged. They filed inside, Lily going straight to bed without complaint. Matthias checked the stove, added wood, made sure everything was secure for the night. Ranger made his rounds, checking corners, windows, doing the security sweep he'd been trained for. And Karrin stood in the center of her cabin, no longer lonely, no longer isolated, no longer hiding, and felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Peace. Good night, Mom, Matthias said, heading for his room. Good night, son. The words were simple, ordinary, the kind of exchange that happened in families every night around the world. But for Karrin and Matthias, they were extraordinary. They were proof of healing, evidence of forgiveness, promise of futures that included each other. Karrin settled into her own bed, with Ranger lying on the floor beside her. Through the thin walls, she could hear Matthias's breathing, evening out into sleep, could hear Lily's soft snoring from the loft. Her family, her impossibly reconstructed, miraculously restored family. All because she'd bought a dying dog for $1. All because she'd been willing to take a chance on something nobody else wanted. All Because sometimes the smallest acts of compassion have the largest consequences. She reached down, placed her hand on Ranger's head. He huffed contentedly, already half asleep. "You knew," she whispered to him. "From the beginning, you knew how this would end." His tail thumped once in acknowledgement, or maybe just in contentment. Either way, Karrin chose to take it as agreement. Tomorrow, they'd go back to the hospital, would sit with Jessica through her recovery, would figure out the practical details of building a life together. Matthias and Lily moving to the area, finding work, establishing custody arrangements, would plant gardens and split wood and teach Lily about the mountains. But tonight, for this one perfect moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Everyone was home, everyone was safe, everyone was loved, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Spring came late to the Wyoming mountains that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the world. Snow melted into rushing creeks, wildflowers pushed through thawing earth, and the forest came alive with birdsong and new growth. Karrin stood on her porch, watching the valley green up, Ranger beside her, and marveled at how different everything looked through the lens of not being alone. Jessica had recovered slowly but completely. The doctors called it miraculous, though Jessica herself said it was mostly stubbornness and the knowledge that people were looking for her. She'd moved to Ridgeline after being released from the hospital, taking a job with the Forest Service, coordinating search and rescue operations. "Someone needs to keep these mountains safe," she'd said. "Might as well be someone who knows exactly how dangerous they can be." She visited the cabin regularly, bringing supplies, sharing meals, slowly building the friendship with Matthias that had been interrupted by catastrophe. There was something between them, Karrin could see it, even if they couldn't quite yet, but they were both taking their time, both healing from different wounds. That was fine. The mountains taught patience if they taught anything. Matthias had taken a position as a wilderness safety instructor, teaching young rangers the skills he'd spent 20 years perfecting. He'd moved into a small house in Ridgeline, close enough to visit the cabin daily, but far enough to have his own space. Lily spent weekends at the cabin, learning from Karrin the way Matthias had once learned, but with more laughter and less fear. The girl had her grandmother's practical nature and her father's gentleness, a combination that suggested she'd grow into someone formidable. Rachel had been generous with custody arrangements, recognizing that Lily thrived with the expanded family structure. She'd even visited once, spending an awkward but cordial weekend helping Lily plant a vegetable garden. "She needs this," Rachel had told Karrin privately. "Needs roots and wilderness and family, things I couldn't give her in the city." It was more grace than Karrin felt she deserved, but she was learning to accept grace. Was learning that not everything had to be earned or paid for with suffering. The cabin had expanded. Not physically, Karrin couldn't afford that, but in presence. Matthias had built a small guest room addition with his own hands, working through the winter with stubborn determination. Lily's drawings covered the once bare walls. Ranger's bed sat beside the stove, worn now from constant use. The bookshelves held children's books alongside field guides. The kitchen table, which had once seated one, now regularly accommodated 4 or 5. Vernon stopped by occasionally, usually with some excuse about checking on her, but really just curious about the transformation. "Never thought I'd see you with a full house," he'd said during his last visit. "Never thought you'd let anyone in." "Neither did I," Karrin admitted. "But sometimes life has other plans. That dog eye. Sold you for $1, Vernon said, watching Ranger sprawl in a patch of sunlight. "Best business transaction I ever made. Worst profit margin, but best outcome." Karrin smiled. "I'd say we both got more than we bargained for." The letters from Matthias, all 23 of them, now sat in a wooden box on Karrin's bedside table. She'd read them all multiple times, had even shared some with Lily, wanting the girl to understand that families could break and heal, that love could survive silence and stubbornness and accumulated mistakes. The forest warden badge had come out of its drawer. She didn't wear it that part of her life was over, but she'd framed it, hung it beside the door. A reminder of who she'd been, what she'd learned, how far she'd come. Young rangers who visited for training would ask about it, and she'd tell them stories about fire behavior and evacuation procedures and the choices you had to make when lives were at stake. She told them about mistakes too, about the cost of putting duty over love, about learning too late but not too late how to balance professionalism with humanity. The young pine they'd planted at Jessica's death site had survived the winter. Karrin visited it regularly, checking its growth, making sure deer weren't browsing it too heavily. It would grow tall eventually, would become part of the forest's canopy, would shelter generations of animals and plants. A living memorial to survival, to stubborn refusal to give up, to the grace of second chances. One morning in late May, Karrin woke to find Matthias, Lily and Jessica all gathered in her kitchen, making breakfast with enthusiastic incompetence. Pancakes were burning, coffee was too strong, eggs were scrambled into something resembling rubber. But they were laughing, talking over each other, moving around the small space with the easy familiarity of family. Ranger sat in the middle of it all, tail wagging, accepting scraps from Lily with patient dignity. "What's all this?" Karrin asked from the loft ladder. "Celebration," Matthias said. "It's been exactly 6 months since everything changed, since I found you, since Ranger found Jessica, since we all found each other." 6 months, Karrin repeated. Half a year. In the context of 20 years of separation, it was nothing. But it also felt like forever, like she couldn't quite remember what life had been like before. "So we made breakfast," Lily announced proudly. "Dad burned the pancakes, but Jessica says that's how she likes them. Extra crispy," Jessica confirmed, grinning. They ate together. The 5 of them crowded around the table that wasn't quite big enough but was exactly right anyway. Karrin looked at their faces, her sons, her granddaughters, her son's close friend who might become more, her dog who'd brought them all together, and felt her chest tighten with emotion. She didn't try to hide anymore. "I love you," she said abruptly. "All of you. I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you." Silence fell. Then Lily launched herself at Karrin, wrapping small arms around her. Matthias joined from the other side. Jessica hung back, but Karrin reached out and pulled her in too. Even Ranger got up, pressed his bulk into the group embrace, tail wagging so hard his whole body moved. They stood like that for a long moment, a tangle of arms and love and second chances. When they finally pulled apart, everyone's eyes were wet. "We love you too, Grandma," Lily said. "Even when you make us eat weird forest vegetables." Everyone laughed, the moment breaking into something lighter but no less significant. Later, after breakfast was cleaned up and Jessica had left for work and Lily had gone exploring with Ranger supervising, Matthias and Karrin sat on the porch with coffee. "Thank you," Matthias said quietly, "for taking the chance, for buying Ranger, for letting us back into your life." "Thank you for not giving up on me," Karrin replied. "For 23 letters I didn't read, for coming to find me anyway, for forgiving me when I couldn't forgive myself." "That's what family does," Matthias said. "We mess up, we hurt each other, but we don't give up." "No," Karrin agreed. "We don't give up." Lily's laughter echoed from somewhere in the trees, followed by Ranger's answering bark. The sound of it, young and joyful and alive, filled the clearing, bounced off mountains, scattered into spring air. Karrin closed her eyes and let herself feel it, all of it. The pain of 20 lost years, the miracle of 6 months found, the weight of guilt released, the lightness of grace accepted. She thought about the wire cage in Vernon's trading post, about the dying dog nobody wanted, about the crumpled dollar bill that had bought more than she'd ever imagined possible. Sometimes the things nobody else wants are the ones that save you. Sometimes the smallest investment yields the greatest return. Sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning. She'd bought a dog for $1, and in return she'd gotten her family back, her purpose restored, her life, her actual life, not just survival, returned to her. It was the best dollar she'd ever spent, the best decision she'd ever made. And as she sat there on her porch with her son beside her, her granddaughter's laughter in the distance, her dog's watchful presence, and the mountains standing eternal around them, Karrin Hoyle finally understood something she'd forgotten in 20 years of isolation. You could come back from anything, could heal from any wound, could rebuild from any destruction. All it took was courage to make the first small choice, to reach out instead of pulling in, to risk loving again even when love had burned you before. All it took was $1 and one chance and one dying dog, who turned out to be not dying at all, just waiting, like all of them had been waiting, waiting to be found, waiting to come home, waiting for the moment when small choices would become big miracles and broken things would finally start to heal. The moment had come, and Karrin was no longer waiting. She was finally, truly, completely alive.